introductions. Cecilie Hellestveit briefly touched the question about Iran. I would very much like to hear from the IDF how you look on the challenge from Iran. Obviously, it's a huge challenge for all Western countries, but I don't think I exaggerate if I say that it's especially deadly threat seen from Israel. Thomas Friedman in New York Times argued that he would really hate to see a nuclear Iran, but he thought that it would be even worse if it would have to risk a regional war. What is your thoughts about the risks here?
First of all, lucky for Thomas Friedman, he's not the chief of staff. The idea. If you would ask the chief of staff, what is Israel's biggest challenge? It's, of course, Iran. Iran is not only dangerous because of the weapons that it possesses, but also because of the direct, I would say, leadership and doctrine and very close contact with all the various terror organizations. Hamas and Hezbollah and so on. Just 2 weeks ago, we stopped a ship called Victoria. It was German-owned, the shipping line was French, the crew was multinational, but they had one destination, from Latakia in Syria to Hamas in Gaza. They had missiles that Gaza still doesn't have, short to sea missiles, which has some strategic impact in our area. The funding behind this ship was Iranian funding. Also, I think, maybe I'll raise this question to the panel. You know, Iran has an interest to spread its doctrine and its belief. And now the question is, don't they have a fertile ground when the situation is unstable, just like Al-Qaeda has? But definitely, I would say Iran is the #1 threat for us.
If you could hold that thought, I will take some more questions, and then probably could answer several in a row.
Okay, so my question is concerning to your beautiful analysis. Well, I think we in a Western country make quite grave mistake by judging what happens there by the behavior of Egyptian elites or elites in Tunisia, the most prominent country in the Middle East when it comes to education and closest to what is called a civic society. But we are pretty oblivious about the fact that there are masses completely unattached to that sort of Western-like intelligentsia, who thinks in terms not state, but ummah, this kind of the most dreamt of commonwealth of all Muslims. And we are getting excited and have, of course, a lot of sympathies. And at the same time, we have to remember the masses have their own dynamics. And this dynamics is very often perpetuated by Islam of different shades. Some moderate or orthodox moderate, some of them are militant, some of them are not militant, but Islam, among the majority of people in Egypt, I would say 60%, is the guidelines. And the third most important factor is economy. We cannot build democracy without, first of all, civic movement, which is in Egypt and in Tunisia in residual form. But economy is something which is feeding people, which is giving optimism, which is employing the cohorts of unemployed and well-educated people. Thank you very much.
I have seen a few more hands. I will take 2 more now, and then we will hear from the panelists, and then I haven't forgotten the rest.
Good morning. Thank you for the statements. I've got 2 questions specifically to the IDF. One of them is collateral damage. It's always disappointing. One has great hopes for Israel, but it doesn't seem to give the same rights to its neighbors as it gives to its own citizens. I mean, Palestinians should have the right to see their children grow up, and collateral damage is never a good thing. And when one hears of Israel bombing water stations and electrical generators, that is collateral damage and cannot be considered a very kind thing. That's one thing. So it's hard as a liberal, I find, to support Israel in the way it behaves externally. The second part is it not, to some extent, in Israel's favor that you actually have weak authoritarian governments as its neighbors. They have enough to suppress their own populace, so they can never be real aggressors towards Israel. If they now become democracies and have economic growth, that might actually pose a greater threat to Israel. Your commentary would be appreciated.
Okay, I'll take one more question, and the rest we will have to leave for the next round. I see one over there. If I could pass this, because it's difficult for others to hear.
Thank you very much for interesting introductions. My questions go to Leibovich from the IDF. Two questions. I felt you didn't say anything about the new challenges for IDF given the democratic spring, should we call it, in the Middle East, the Arab countries. So how does IDF, for example, view the new situation in Egypt? Obviously very relevant given that a new regime there's how should we say, policies towards the border to Gaza and to Israel, of course. And the second comment and question is, I felt in your analysis of the challenges in the West Bank, you left out a very important issue regarding the settlements and IDF's challenges to this. Now, these are, by any legal standard, illegal, and I would wonder to hear your views on how the IDF see these settlements as a challenge. Now, I feel that both security-wise, but also politically, I feel they are a source of great frustration among the Arab, Palestinian population, obviously posing somewhat a security threat, but also a political threat in that they impede the peace process.
Maybe we, because there are questions and comments to quite a few, but Avital, you can start, and we will be after Cecilie.
Okay, so regarding the collateral damage, thank you for your question. I think Israel is one of the few countries that actually developed some interesting ways to deal with the human shield factor, because the collateral damage has a lot to do with the human shield. And listen, sir, we do not just bomb electricity plants out of the blue. We did bomb an electricity plant. By the way, Israel supplies 70% of the electricity to Gaza. And we bombed the electricity plant during Kaslet operation as part of the operation. And that operation came after 8 years and 8,000 rockets. So I think, you know, there's some extent which you can, as a country, say to your civilians, we're just laying back and not doing anything. But we have reached a point and developed different, I would say, military capabilities in order to try and minimize that damage. And I'll give a few examples. Show me another army that calls up homes of a terrorist and asks them to evacuate. Because during Kaslet operation, we have made thousands of phone calls to terrorists in their homes and said, we're coming after you, we know you're inside, please take your family and leave the house. And sometimes we also call the neighbors, because the way the buildings are built in Gaza are very densely together. This is first thing. The second thing, we conveyed messages through the local media. The third thing, we gave leaflets. We dropped leaflets, over 100,000 leaflets. And for an operational army to go to some area and say, listen, the next 48 hours we'll be operating in this area. In a way, you understand it's giving up your military secrets, but we have done that. And the fourth thing we did is we invented something which is called knock on the roof. If all the other means fail, namely the local media and the phone calls and the leaflets, and that terrorist who just refuses to leave its house, we drop a little bomb that does not do damage, only noise. We just touch the roof of the house in the corner. It makes a lot of noise. Then that person inside understands that we know he's in there. So we are going through a lot of trouble in order to try and minimize the collateral damage. And there's something else that has to be said. A large amount of the collateral damage is due to the large arsenal of rockets that are underneath the houses. Let's not forget that during Kaslet, we showed that 11 mosques served as storages for rockets. And also today, There are many warehouses that are right down in the basements of houses. So in the first floor you have the family, the second floor you have actually the parents of the family, but in the basement there is a storages of rockets. And when you have so much storage of rockets and weaponry in civilian areas, there's damage because of that. So who is actually risking who? Hamas is civilians, or we because we have to defend ourselves from the rockets? Regarding the question of the new challenges in Egypt, we have a joint border with Egypt. We have peace with Egypt. We intend to keep that peace treaty in Egypt. I can tell you that once a week or two, there are some Egyptian successes in trying to find people that smuggle weapons into Gaza. It's not enough, but it's happening from time to time. I think it's too soon for us to really monitor and see where those changes will take the IDF. The IDF is a military organization, like any military elsewhere. It has two jobs, either to be in war or to prepare for war, which we hope will never come. But I think it's too soon. We hope the border will remain quiet. We are just now building a border fence with Egypt, and one of the good examples of neighboring countries is the fact that we didn't have any physical fence, physical border. There's the Egyptian road, there's the sand, and there's the Israeli road. So maybe that's a positive reason, but we hope that it will remain quiet and the peace treaty, of course, will be respected. Regarding the settlements, since I am here in a military capacity and the settlements is a political issue, I, with your permission, will not get to the issue of political settlements and so on. I'm sorry, I forgot to add in my previous introduction about the smuggling from the sea. Because many times I hear people or I read stories about the marine blockade in Gaza. And I don't know how much of that has reached here. But last year there were 8 barrels of explosive that were prepared in Gaza and just sailed away in the beaches in order to reach Israeli beaches, full of explosives, 8 of them, one day after another. Last November 09, we found a ship from Iran called the Frankop, filled with a large amount of ammunition that was supposed to reach once again some terror organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah and provide them with weapons. So the sea, as far as we understand, is a major route of smuggling weaponry into Israel to reach those terror organizations. And I did not mention that before. And I want to say one word about the flotilla, because maybe we'll expect more flotillas. Look, there is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And I urge the press to go to the markets, like I have pictures from the markets in Gaza, and see the wealth, the food, and the prosperity that it is there. Of course, it's not pink. It's not that there is employment for everyone, but there is no humanitarian crisis. Therefore, there is no need to bring in humanitarian aid. The last flotilla, the provocative flotilla that took place the 31st of May, consisted of 6 ships. The biggest one was the Mavi Mamre. It had 450 people. And guess what? 0 humanitarian aid on that ship. Only 3 out of the 6 had some aid. If you take all the aid together, it's equivalent maybe to 2 days of humanitarian aid that is going inside Gaza anyway. And guess another thing. 50% of that aid was medicine that was expired, long expired. So what stands behind those flotilla, and I'm raising this subject because maybe we'll expect additional flotillas, is provocation. It's provocation, and that's it. There is not a real intention of helping those people there. Of course, we found money on board those people that, they were the IHH members that went to the Mavi Mamre. There were approximately 40 of them. Some of the people, of course, were human rights activists, but the hardcore of that flotilla were IHH members that had only one thing in mind, to provoke and target Israeli soldiers. We found on board a very large amount of bars, rods, metal saws that they brought with them in advance. I mean, if you go for peaceful humanitarian flotilla, you don't bring with you metal saws in order to cut down bars. Masks, they even had weapons, which they probably dropped over deck once we found them. So this is just the word about the flotilla.
Yes, I think there may be some disagreement in the panel on the particular situation in Gaza, but we'll leave that for now. Okay, to the gentleman here, I very much agree with what you say. I think that in terms of how we are going to see this play out with the masses of the Arab world, nobody knows that. Nobody knows that. Not even the Muslim Brotherhood knows that. And I think even the Muslim Brotherhood is, to a certain extent, nervous about it, because they don't want too much support, because they don't want to be perceived as stealing this away from the people. This is particularly the situation in Egypt and Tunisia. Now, I think there are two factors that may be decisive for the next couple of years. How will the Islamist organizations, or political Islam, fashion their political parties? What will they emphasize? What will be their aim? And to what extent will they use the message of Islam that the masses are so familiar with to further their own political agenda? Now, if they decide to use that in an optimal way in order to muster as much support as possible for the next 5 years, I think this is very dangerous. If they are responsible, and I think that the tendencies we are seeing from both Egypt and particularly perhaps Tunisia, which has a somewhat, perhaps more moderate Muslim Brotherhood movement, are good for now. Now, what will happen in the next years, we don't know. But I think that the initial signals have been more positive than what I perhaps would have expected. And I think that, but we are to a certain extent dependent on wisdom and strategic kind of understanding from the leadership of these Islamist movements, and that they see that they cannot use the entire potential that they have in the current situation. Because remember, we are still talking about, in North Africa, a number of people that are analphabets. The message that they get is primarily through the mosque. If you don't read and write in an Arab country, it does mean that you most probably will not understand the political discussions going on the television and in the radio, because they are held in classical Arabic, or modern standard Arabic, which would be equivalent, well, it's a bit equivalent to Latin in Europe. Perhaps not as different as that, but is quite equivalent. So being an analphabet in Egypt is a much more dramatic thing in terms of following a political discussion than, for instance, in any other comparable country outside the Arab world that I am familiar with anyway. So I think this is something that the people in the region are also fearing. And of course, the irony of the current situation is that a part of the support for Gaddafi in Libya is by people that are fearing this precise picture, that Islamists will take over Libya, for instance. And these are now the people that we are effectively conducting a military operation against. So I think, there are a number of different situations here. In each country, there are different scenarios, but I think that overall, how this will turn out is something that nobody knows, and only time will tell. But I think if you want to have increasing information about which road it will take, Tunisia and Egypt are the societies that we should watch, because this is where this will play out first. And I think what happens in Tunisia and in Egypt will have a great impact on how this will be played out in other countries in the region. Just one more thing. This is the point that I know, but I think this is an important issue. How will this influence the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? This also we don't know. I think there are two things that we need to keep in mind. One is that over the past decades, there has been a number of shared interests between Israeli leadership and the Arab regimes. If you go through the analysis of the shared interests, it is astonishing how many shared interests they have. With the current change, this may be somewhat altered. I think they will still have a number of shared interests, but I think in certain key areas these will change. I think that the new regimes will have to be much more responsive to the demands of their own populations, which will mean a much tougher tone, not only officially, but also unofficially towards Israel and the Palestinians, because Israel is not the only party that is preventing this from being peacefully resolved. Now, does that mean that the Arab populations will rise in rage against Israel? I don't think so. I think that the amount of concern by the average Arab about the fate of the Palestinians is important, but not as important that we think that it is. I think that their own fate is much more important. I think that the average Egyptian, the average Tunisian, the Arab Jordanian, and the Arab Jordanian is perhaps a different issue, but are much more concerned about their own situation, and their main interest will be to settle the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I think that is going to be a substantial change in the next years, provided that this comes out somewhat on the positive side.
I will give the floor also to Hanne. I have seen 3 or 4 hands. If there are those among us who would like to pose a question but prefer to do it in Norwegian, please feel free and we can help translate it.
Yes, most of the questions are not for me, so I won't really take up that much time, but I will still pick up on one of the question that you did not answer when it came to the settlements. I did my doctorate on an infantry battalion in the IDF, and perhaps not surprisingly, the views of the foot soldiers may deviate somewhat from the establishment. But it's always like that, I guess. But when it comes to the issue of settlements, I think there's a lot of really interesting things happening internally in the IDF. And many recent studies show that this is also one of the things that are about to split the IDF into. It's always difficult to portray states as homogeneous and as if they only have one opinion. For example, when it came to Egypt, there's been lots of, the revolution, whatever, has been described as, that of the youngsters and the Facebook and the younger people. You have, of course, you're always radical when you're younger. Many soldiers in Israel are more radical than their state leaders. But particularly when it comes to the issue of the settlements, there is a very interesting trend going on inside of the IDF. There's been it's of course hard to, you have all the numbers. I wish I could give them to me, but for us outside it's hard to get numbers. I want to pick your brain. But for us who can't really access it, there is one IDF publication, actually a very recent one, who showed an interesting development. And that is, during the last 5 to 10 years, the issue of the settlements, as I said, is, and particularly since the Hezbollah war actually, is splitting the IDF. Because you would see that the more secular, the younger secular leftist part of the IDF are less and less willing and motivated to serve in the IDF, taken that they actually have to protect the settlements. So you would see there is an increase in refusal amongst secular Israelis of 25% since 2006, which is quite drastic. And on the flip side of the coin, you will see that the settlers, because there is a vacuum always created when someone is less motivated to serve. You create a vacuum, and you see those who fills it are, according to the IDF publication at least, it's the settlers. At the time of the Oslo Accords, only 2.1% of national religious settlers, the ideologically motivated settlers, were willing or motivated to serve in the IDF. The number has climbed since 2006 to 31.4%. It's we don't really know if that will continue, but it insinuates a quite dramatic shift when it comes to the issue of the settlement. and who is actually willing to protect it. And when you do, when there are these surveys of Israelis, younger Israelis, particularly in Tel Aviv, what they're actually willing to fight for, you will see that they're still very much willing to fight for the security of their state, but not for those of their own population who are putting the security of their state into question. There is there are lots of interesting and quite drastic processes occurring inside of Israel at the time being, particularly when it comes to the settlements.
I have to interfere here, my dear colleague. I'm serving 18 years in the IDF, and I have to tell you that I respect, of course, the survey. I don't know where it's from, but I don't feel like the settlements are splitting the IDF, not at all.
It's from the IDF's publication, Malachot, in November.
Which, the publication, by the way, that publication booklet, we have either officers or ex-officers write in it different, it's like academic articles, so that's fine. But having as someone who is currently serving in the IDF and have been for the past 18 years, I really don't feel that it is splitting anywhere. And also, you have to remember that the settlers overall represent, what, something like 2% of the Israeli population? And this is also the number of soldiers from the settlements. So it's a very small percentage. To serve in the IDF, it's something that any teenager in Israel grows with, the notion and the need to serve in the IDF, because this is the only country that we have. And this is how they grow up. And actually, the motivation to serve is still very high. I can tell you that to go to combat unit, to elite combat units, there are 3 people that want to go in every one opening. So the motivation is very high, and this is the way the children grow. They understand that this is their obligatory service. They understand that this is the only country they have. And also, something else. The IDF does not deal with civilians. It's a bit different from the Norwegian military. We don't deal with civilians. So if you need to evacuate settlers, except that what happened in Gaza, that was a government decision, we did it with the police together. But in Hebron today, as you know, there are Jewish settlers living there. If there will be some sort of an interaction with the Palestinians, the police will deal with it. Because the police is the only one that's dealing with civilians. The IDF will maybe give an external security envelope, not more than that. We will not deal with them directly.
Okay, now for the questions again.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tone Rand. Thank you to the panelists for very interesting presentations. I am very interested in bridge building between different interests and fora. And I think in this complex world, it is very important to define shared values. At the conference on Europe, which took place here in Oslo 2 days ago, the EU President, Mr. Herman van Rompuy, underlined the importance of the UN Resolution 1973, and he characterized it as a landmark resolution. He also made reference to the Paris meeting on the 19th of March, underlining that it was a historic meeting. So my point is, which are the possibilities within this window of opportunities which has in fact been opened with the situation in Libya for cooperation between interests, between people from different international fora? I'm thinking particularly of the EU, the UN, NATO, and not the least the participation of the Arab League in this Paris meeting. I think if it is possible to construct a bridge between the Western world and the Arab world, we have achieved something very important. What are your views on the realistic possibilities for cooperation and coordination in the future? Thank you.
And with yellow sweater.
Thank you. I've got 2 short questions. First, Francis Fukuyama has just launched a new book where he tells that political institutions have to be grounded in culture. So I was wondering if the Arab states are ready for democratic institutions. And my second question, you talked a little about the trust, and trust is a necessary precondition for any agreement, not just peace agreement. So I was wondering if you have any trust-building measures between the Israelis and Palestinians.
Thank you. Given the panel's composition and the increased understanding of the importance of education of women in social and economic development, I'm a bit surprised that there had been no comments as to the possible importance and influence of much more education among upper class and middle class women in the Arab countries. Thank you.
I believe I've covered all the hands, but if there are anyone left, please show your hand now. If not, we will, yeah, one more. And then after that, we will have the final round of comments. It can be used, of course, to answer questions, but also to make your final remarks. And after that, we will actually have to end the meeting.
As an Israeli living in Norway in the past 5 years, I'd like to challenge Avital by saying that I think that the PR of Israel needs to be worked out thoroughly. And I want to ask you whether you have any new thinking how to challenge Israel's PR, especially in Scandinavia and in Norway specifically. Because I find out that the way that Hamas and Hezbollah are using the human shield is working extremely well. And I think Israel is not using the media in the right way and should be much more blunt. And I'll say a very, very tough example. There's a family that was killed recently and the pictures that were released. I know that internally it might look bad, but externally I think the truth of the terror and the way the psychological effect it has and actual killings must be more sophisticated, I think. And it's an arm of this century. And you should use the kids who have the brains for that, and they are used to it, in order to challenge the Western world with new thinking about Israel.
I would like to thank everyone for the questions, and now also hopefully maybe some answers. Cecilia?
Okay, I'll try to be brief. I'll answer 3 of the questions. Now, first of all, to the lady in the back, in terms of the potential for increased, I would say, cooperation, I have 2 comments. Now, I think, first of all, I think it was with great relief that the international community saw the reaction from the Arab League to the crisis in Syria. I think it was with somewhat less relief that they realized that once the actual operation that the Arab League was asking for was put in place, certain individuals in the Arab League seemed to back out of this support. Now this has to do with an ongoing presidential campaign in Egypt. Amr Moussa, who is the chief of the Arab League, he is also the presidential candidate in Egypt, and obviously this is also linked to those kind of processes. Now, I think in terms of cooperation with the Arab League, I think a number of actors would like to see a strengthening of this regional organization so that they will be able to cope with some of the challenges that we will see in a number of countries over the next years. Historically, this is not an organization that works that way, but it would be an advantage if they could raise to the task, such as the African Union, such as a number of other regional organizations are increasingly taking responsibility for the regional security in their member countries. I'm not very, very optimistic, but I think that there is a possibility, and that cooperation with the Arab League should be really emphasized in this respect. I think that the Barcelona process, which has been the kind of initiative of France, which has been going on for a number of years in terms of creating a kind of second market in Northern Africa, and strengthening perhaps democratic institutions and these things. This was a project that was more or less ended in 2005, 2006. But these things are now being revitalized and revived. And I think that if the situation turns out to go rather well in North Africa, and I think that the odds are quite high actually, or much higher than in other parts of the Arab world, I think that we can see an increased integration economically and an increased cooperation between the EU and North Africa, with the idea of creating areas in North Africa where people can dwell and live in relative peace and security. So I think that the potential for cooperation, particularly with North African countries, is quite good. Now, in terms of Fukuyama and his ideas, now he tend to have always a very, well, there is some shred of evidence to his theories, but he tend to kind of perhaps make them a bit too simplistic. But there is a problem in the Arab world on a number of levels when it comes to democracy. I think the primary challenge is the masses, that you have a number of people that are not really used to participate. No, they're not used to that. And you have very strong networks such as families, where there is a patriarch more or less deciding what the family should mean externally. You have tribal structures, particularly in Libya, Jordan, and Yemen, for instance, that will be very challenging for democracy in these countries. In Yemen, currently, you have a number of the tribes who have basically gone together. Even Saleh, the president's own tribe, has turned against him. But they are saying, we accept the legitimate demand of democracy, but we're not going to touch the power structure of the tribes. Now, that is basically Pashtunistan. Now, it's very similar to what we are struggling with in Afghanistan. And we have certain similar structures in Libya. Now, this is a huge problem and a huge challenge. But I don't think that all the societies in the Arab world look like that. Iraq looked like that when we went, well, when the Americans and the coalition of the willing went in 2003. It looked like that. But that had to do with the fact that if you have a society that is destroyed over years due to war, international sanctions, the tribal structure comes up again. One of the reasons why we have so strong tribal structures in Afghanistan is because this is also a society that has been subject to a number of years of war. We're also seeing the same thing amongst the Palestinians, that the tribal structures are being reinforced with the type of insecure situation that they have. Now, this is making democratization much more difficult. One last issue. When it comes to Arab women, they are highly educated. From the middle class and upper class, the majority of students in universities in this part of the world are women. That is not the problem. The problem is structural. And I don't think that we're going to see substantial changes in this in the short term. In the long term, that's an entirely different question. Thank you.
Well, Avital and I can share 45 seconds now, so I'll be very brief. We talk about two things here, so it's really hard. So it's very... No, we talk about two things here, so it's really hard to wrap up, because we both talk about the Middle East situation in the region in general, and Israeli-Palestinian conflict in specific. And of course, Israeli-Palestinian conflict tends to have a dynamic of its own. I'm not of an optimistic nature, so I'm very glad I'm an academic and not a diplomat. God bless them. But cooperation is really two things. Just you have diplomatic cooperation and you have value-based cooperation. I think it's really far ahead that we will see, for example, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, trust and value-based cooperation. But all states will necessarily be forced to have diplomatic cooperation anyway to function. So I think it's two different directions we will go. Thank you.
You said before the women are not the problem. The women are never the problem. It's a worldwide Okay, so confidence building measures with the Palestinians. Where should I start? Maybe with the millions of shekels that we invest in just paving roads all over Judea and Samaria. The fact that from summer of 2008, Arab Israelis enter Judea and Samaria freely, and they leave a lot of money behind them, so they contribute greatly to the economy. Going from businessmen that are doing business inside Israel, taking down those 200 roadblocks are a huge confidence building measure, I think. So there's a whole line of them, and it's been going on for the past 3 years. Also, dozens of meetings between IDF officials and Palestinian officials is something that a few years ago we wouldn't dream of even seeing, and it's taking place, and this also shows that this confidence is actually taking place. Now, regarding my favorite subject, the PA, the PR, there are 800 reporters in Israel, foreign reporters, because Israel is one of the most interesting places, obviously, to serve, and very prestige for a reporter. Usually it's the second place after Iraq, the prestigious second place after Iraq. And definitely it's very challenging, there's no question about it. I've been working or been emphasizing on the Scandinavian press for the past 2 years. It's sort of I would say, an upgraded effort, and the part that I'm here is also a part of this effort. You'd be surprised or not to find that many of the Norwegians covering Israel is doing it from Norway or from Jerusalem and not bothering to leave their offices. Now, I moved my office to Jerusalem 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and I'm sitting in a civilian building, not a military base with high fences and scary guards in the entrance, and I'm sitting in the same building where all the foreign press is. So on the floor above me, I have CNN and Sky, and the floor behind that, above that, I have TF1 and France 24, and dozens of them are in the same building, and I chose the building to be relevant and close to that, to them. However, I can count on one hand the number of journalists that chose to come and have information or join on our field tours that we take to the bases, because for many years we are opening our bases to the press, and we're giving opportunity to meet with the soldiers and the officers. You know how difficult it is to convince someone to drive, God forbid, for 1 hour from Jerusalem to the south part of Israel to see a house that was damaged from a rocket, or just to go to the local police station and see shelves full of rockets, because every year or a couple of months they have to empty those shelves to make room for new ones. So it's very difficult, but I have to tell you that I have some success. 2 years ago, I had a reporter from NRK, the biggest network, come for Israel. I convinced him, and for the first time he came. And guess what? We opened the doors, he went to an IDF unit, and he did some stories about IDF paratroopers. I don't know if you saw that. A 13-minute long piece about the troopers, the paratroopers, Israeli paratroopers. He was there for 48 hours with them, in the tents, in the field, in an exercise. And we did another story. He came a few months before that, and we did another story before that. In other words, the doors are open, but it's very, very difficult to convince people to come to Israel. I mean, I'm a great believer that if you come and you see things with your own eyes, that will make a difference. In order to challenge that, we are working with a new medium, ready for 2 years. We have Twitter, we have a blog, we have, all our proofs are on YouTube. We have a channel on YouTube, and you can see the footage that we provide. It's actually aerial footage and footage from drones, and this actually gives the proof of what we're talking about. So in order to challenge that PA, which is, I agree with you totally, it's a whole new battlefield, we are also directing our efforts to the new media.
Thank you very much.